Are there any questions in the room before we look at any of the online questions? Has there anybody got any questions in the room? Don't be shy. Please. Can we have a microphone over here?
Hi, everybody, and thanks very much for all your presentations this morning. My question is based a little bit beyond the technology. So, Thomas, you might be the best person to answer this question, I'm not sure. But you've all talked about what we're capable of doing with technology. The other half of that, which is, I would say, the 90% half, is how is this going to measurably impact business financially? How are we going to inspire companies to take up this challenge and be able to engage with your technologies and not go bankrupt in the process? Because we can't do it all with public funding, and there has to be commercial reality to it at the end of the day. So I'd like to know from the panelists how they're addressing commercial reality.
Thomas, do you want to take a stab?
I can try comment. I agree with you. I mean, I don't have any solutions to this, but I think, as I said, I think the technical sides of this issue is something that we will deal with. It's not going to be easy. I mean, there's a lot of strong and valuable engineering work that really need to be done. But the problem is getting the business case of this, and because that's creating the momentum. And I think we need to turn actually ultimately to the cargo movers, the owners of the cargo. And we see slow things making there. I think still, to be honest, there's more said than actually done. They are saying some things, some big companies that were out. I think it was even just last week. If you go and speak with them more in confined spaces, it's not that manifested. And I think that's where we need to start. And I think we as a consumer should ask for, when we have the capability, we are in the Western world, we do have purchasing power enough to really make some decisions. Would we like to buy that or that based on kind of the environmental footprint? And I think that's where we need to start as well. I don't have more advanced saying than that.
Daniel, your customers are actually telling you that's what they want. And are they prepared to pay?
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Yeah, so referencing what you just said there, that last week it was the Aspen Institute wrote an ambition statement for zero emission shipping by, I believe it's 2030 or 2040. And that has been signed on to by Patagonia, Amazon, IKEA, and more. And Patagonia actually was in conversation with us to try to ship on the wooden vessel, but we're just not ready. And they are definitely willing to pay it. It adds value to their product. We cannot build ships fast enough. Like I'm trying to go as fast as I can fill them, and the clients will pay more. But that wooden vessel, Seba, on the particular route that we're looking at, it would not cost more.
Interesting. Ivan, do you have a comment?
I think my microphone is on, yeah. So I think you will see...
Speak up, Ivan, because
yes. I think you will see new companies coming into the market. If you turn the clock back 100 years, we went from sail to steam in Norway. I think Wilhelmsen is one of the only companies that survived. It was about 90% of the sailing companies in Norway, they collapsed because they didn't make the technology shift. So you will probably see the same thing happening now, changing over again to zero-emission vessels. But there's lots of, there are lots of requirements, a lot of new laws coming, and the cargo owners sit with the key. Like the cargo owners are basically giving you contracts to develop new ships, and we see that especially for inland waterways in Europe. The big cargo owners are giving huge contracts to zero-emission vessels operating on the rivers. So they are pushing because of the EU taxonomy and the CO2 requirements to be pushed down. So this is all happening from that side. So the ship owners, they need to follow, otherwise they will not survive, I think. And for Norled in Norway, it's easy. It's the Norwegian Road Administration setting their requirements. If we don't follow them, we're out of business. So they are pushing in the back for everything that's happening in Norway.
But I think your point is very well made, and I think we can't lose sight of the importance of the economic value proposition. And I think today the cost of a tier 3 diesel generator, and I think you have to look at the overall efficiencies of systems. So the method of calculation to tell you whether this system or that system is of good use is ultimately a question of efficiencies. And if you look at the diesel engine, and the 4-stroke diesel engine is less efficient, of course, than a 2-stroke, just to start with, by definition of its design. But Christopher, tell us a little bit about your thoughts around overall system efficiencies and where there are some gains to be made here.
Oh, if my mic is working, or shall I borrow that one? Yeah, what we were saying earlier, it comes back to the challenge: how do we make this work on a deep sea voyage? And the challenge is, from my perspective, is not the technology. The issue is not with the technology. We've seen that the bunkering is a possibility, the onboard storage is a possibility, the technology is there, but how to incorporate it into a vessel. And I don't have any education as a ship designer, but to my understanding, there's obviously issues with the energy content when we're talking about hydrogen in comparison to HFO and LNG. So when comparing to HFO, LNG takes up to twice the amount of space in order to get the same energy content. And it's the same with liquid hydrogen. It takes up twice the amount of space as LNG for the same energy content. And so but the storage and the fuel cells, that type of technology is there. So it's more to get the ship designs ready for this and the infrastructure to be in place to accommodate these volumes that is needed.
Great. Stephen, I have a question here that's come online. It's from Jonathan Kohler at Zemtech. And he asks, will hydrogen bunkering system use bunker tankers for larger scale? And what are the safety issues compared to the current land-based system? So I think his question is really around taking your product and actually putting that itself on the water.
Yeah, so I think from where we're coming from is the idea that, you know, a lot of the vessels are starting small. So when we're looking at bunkering smaller vessels, it makes a lot more sense to try to not build infrastructures that are far too big for these vessels. So logically, it makes sense to just use bunker tanks for the time being, because they're a lot more flexible, and that's likewise why our systems are also equally quite small. Because again, people talk about what's the cost of the infrastructures. Everybody's saying infrastructure is so expensive, it's going to cost billions of pounds, and that's just going to mean that it's going to be impossible to get these vessels off the water. But here we're trying to say no. It's all about scaling up the demand as the demand comes, and by developing our facilities in the most flexible way possible, that we could literally connect our systems within a space of 10 minutes or so, or move them away if we needed to, because demand was there or it wasn't there, or maybe we needed to bunker a ship somewhere else. We could send our unit somewhere else. And so the idea that we've made this system as portable as possible means that we can meet sort of the infrastructure requirements, and the idea of providing infrastructure as a service, that's ultimately what we're looking to try to do. So yes, I think that's the starting point, and actually you could probably go quite large in terms of the number of tanks that you could feasibly connect to our system. Then of course, when the bigger vessels come in, yes, of course, then we can look at larger tanks or more permanent possibilities. But of course, I don't think that we need to do that right now. We can see already how that could happen with the examples of the terminals that we're seeing today with the larger vessels. I think that's kind of our view on this.
Great. Any other questions in the room? Yes, please. If you can just say your name and which company you represent, please.
John Jordan, North Sea Hydrogen Ports and Maritime Community. We've seen the first multimodal refueling station in Port of Antwerp. And if hydrogen is really going to reduce in price, we have to look at varied uses in the ports, so that you're refueling land vehicles, it's used in steel making and so on. How does your liquid hydrogen system, which is portable and has other facets, how does that fit into concept of multimodal refueling?
Yeah, great that you raised that up, because as I say, hopefully on the Friday we will of course be showcasing our unit, but we'll also be soft launching one of our brands to say that this is not just a solution for shipping, this is also a solution for aviation and road transport. And ironically, actually, my background was originally road transport. If we kind of go back, we did a lot of fueling facilities for heavy duty trucks and things like that. And I remember when we looked at adapting our road transport technology back then into the shipping industry, and then realizing how large these vessels were, that we thought, wow, how many trucks do we have to fuel to do the equivalent of one ship, for example? And to come back to the point on economics as well, of the question that was answered, focusing too much on the economics has got us into this problem in the first place. We're here at COP26. We can't be talking just purely on the economic model of finance and things like that. And it's basically been the fact that we've dismissed a lot of these other factors, like the environmental factors. These are things that we need to put into the cost model. Otherwise, we're just optimizing for the bottom line, and that's fundamentally got us into this mess in the first place. We wouldn't need this conference had we actually solved that problem from an economic point of view. So we shouldn't focus purely on financial aspects. And if then we look at regulations, people will come to me all the time saying, hey, but how much is your fuel cost and all this sort of stuff. I said, well, we got bunker fuel or whatever, it's a lot cheaper. How can you expect these ships to happen? I said, well, look at the way the legislation's going. We're going to be trying to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Regulations are already coming in. Countries are already working on making sure those regulations come in, so that by the time we get there, we can actually be there. So what I would say to these people are, well, it's all great that your fuel is low cost, but it doesn't matter how cheap it is if it's banned. If we do not allow these kind of fuels to be used, and we've seen it time and time again. We've seen it, for example, in the IMO 2020 with the sulfur emissions coming in, saying we're not going to permit high sulfur fuels. These things will happen. So we have to trust that we're going to do the right thing. We need to do the right thing, and the economic models will follow from that.
Ivan?
And just some facts. We always talk about the extra cost for the hydrogen or the new fuel. But then for a ship owning perspective and a cargo owner perspective, what is the extra cost per unit freighted? A passenger or a car or a container? Equinor and the Norwegian Ship Owner Association, they did a study together with a master's student, and it's a quite comprehensive study. And in terms of the extra cost per unit freighted, of course, there's a difference between a passenger and a car and a container, etc., and a ton of iron ore or something. But the extra transport cost in total is varying between 10 and 50% extra cost. So a container, instead of costing $100, it will cost $150, just to put an example. We are not talking about increasing price 3 or 4 or 10 times. It's a relative small price, extra price to pay in order to go for zero emission, and that's kind of encouraging for us. And it's something we try to communicate to the policymakers, that the technology shift can be done with relative small cost. That's the fact.
And I can add that in my world of hydrogen production, what I experience, we combine our methanol with water. And of course, water has got 2 hydrogen atoms in it. So if you're going to produce hydrogen via methanol and combine it with 1/3 water, it's like gin and tonic, suddenly you have a much, much more reasonable production point for the cost of hydrogen. And of course, methanol is freely quoted on exchanges right now. So there are many ways that hydrogen can be produced at a reasonable cost base. So I think a lot of the technology that you're hearing today, the technology is there, the means of producing the fuel is there, and the willingness of the ship owners is certainly there, albeit slow. And what we're here to try and do is promote more rapid uptake from a ship owner's point of view, and it's great to see things that Wilhelm's and that are doing, because it's demonstrating that there is no longer just appetite in the room, we've already bit the apple, right? Any other questions in the room? Yes, please.
Hey, thank you very much. Julian Sire, I'm a journalist, and yeah, trying to move away a little from the financial point, but embracing previous comments, and maybe a little more to Sail Cargo and Danielle, who've obviously tapped a really great pool of resources for investment within the crowd. But yeah, there seems like a certain kind of dereliction of responsibility from finance of maybe outsourcing the change to the engineering side of it. So from the engineers and the builders side of things, what would you be looking for from finance and traditional financial institutions to help innovate towards the solutions that from an engineering point of view are clearly emerging?
For Danielle, I think. Financing.
That was for me as an engineering question.
How do you see the traditional financial institutions or models helping to bridge this change? What, as a shipbuilder, can Danielle or the other panelists?
I may not be the best person to answer this because we've never received any institutional investment whatsoever. It's all private. We have over 200 private investors, so I may not be the right person for that.
But would you like any institutional?
We would very much like institutional investors.
I just like, I'm on now. I just like to comment that I think we're already getting there, although slowly. I mean, I see that new projects coming on stream. The banks are cautious giving loans when they see that there's only old technology, nothing clean, nothing new. So that is a very good sign. And then I think what we haven't spoken about here, which is important, that I think that governments around in the world should use their purchasing power. There's a lot of projects, you know, fair risk owned by the governmental and blah blah. All these needs to be, you know, supercharged with the new things. So they need to use their purchasing power and step up.
Yeah. Any other points? If you cast your mind back to what was it? It used to be CSR, and I don't think we talk too much about CSR anymore. It's now been replaced by ESG. And why has ESG supplanted CSR? Because of the investors. Because ESG comes from an investment base. And if you see the momentum that's being driven around ESG, and if you see the balancing of interests that come not just from environmental but social and governance, you're starting to see that there is a responsibility in the room from a finance point of view. And I know we're going to talk about that tomorrow. But there definitely is an increased focus and awareness from investors. And certainly speaking for myself as a US listed company, there isn't a day goes by where we don't have a question raised by one of our investors, either sometimes about this kind of technology that you're talking about that quite frankly I am not able to freely answer. But there are some pretty in-depth questions coming from the investor community looking to really understand, if not, why not taking up this technology. Any other questions in the room? Yeah, please.
Leaning on your comment, ESG is becoming much more invasive in business, important in business, and is taking a huge stake in investment decisions. You guys are all representing different companies from different avenues. Are any of your companies focused on becoming a B corporation or sustainably auditable?
Danielle, yes?
Yes, Sail Cargo Inc. is in the process of becoming a B Corp. We've received, I guess you could call it pre-approval status, but until we are actually operational, we can't be classified as a B Corp, but we've completed all the steps we can.
Great.
Yeah, of course. I think we need to make sure that we're all doing the right things, and certainly from my company's point of view, we're modeling ourselves on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. When we talk about sustainability, we mean sustainability across the chain, and it has to be holistic. We need to make sure that we're doing everything, not just from an economic point of view, not just from an environmental point of view, but also from a social point of view, from inequality. I mean, for example, here, you know, I'd like also to hear from the lady. I saw her hand put up there, but again, it's very easy to ignore people that are not actually representing the industry. For example, women in shipping. I mean, with what my colleague here is also doing, you know, I think we need fresh minds. We need to make sure that we're doing everything from a diversity point of view, because if we don't have diversity in the room, we will not be able to find the right solutions. In the shipping industry particularly, it's such a dominated industry that is potentially of the old hat, and we need to make sure that we have the fresh thinking and that we ensure sustainability across the whole chain.
Danielle. Danielle, go ahead.
Yeah, just a small comment I didn't get to say before. For our ship, we're really looking at that. We call it a triple bottom line, not just financial. And we are already in conversation with a Swedish steel company that hopes to produce mostly or almost carbon-free steel, which we hope to use for this vessel. And as well, we have committed to engage in a study for ship breaking, because we want to look at complete life cycle analysis of the vessel. And of course, we all know that ship breaking is a problem. And yeah, so we're looking at the complete life cycle analysis of the ship, not just the operation from A to B.
Fantastic. Can I come to your question?
Thank you. My name's Rachel Hoyland. I'm a shipping lawyer. I work for Hill Dickinson LLP. And my question is orientated around regulation, and I'm interested to hear to what extent either the presence or absence of regulation in relation to hydrogen especially is an enabler or a barrier to the things that you're trying to do. Anyone who would like to answer?
Well, from our perspective, we are pushing through with for-profit company, and clients want that, and regulation will very likely get in line with that. So other companies such as Airbnb or Uber did not wait in line for regulation. They went ahead and did it, and when it changed the market, it changed everything else with it.
Great point. Ivan?
Yeah, from an engineering perspective, I presume you asked about. Yes, we use the the current IGF regulations or the code as such as a guidance, but in this first project we need to demonstrate by risk analysis that it's a safe solution. So we're going through the whole spectrum, down to the nitty-gritty details, improve safety, find the dimension in risk scenarios, prove that we can handle the consequences, and also look at how often they can occur, so we have a total risk picture. And then we see that the code for the storage on board, IGF code, and we see that the fuel cell rules from the class have certain gaps, certain holes that are not giving the best or safest solution. So then we are demonstrating the right solution, and we are confronting the rules and the codes, and find through our project these things will be updated, and this is a task that the Norwegian Maritime Administration most likely will take into IMO and show, okay, and these are the deviations from the rules, these changes should be implemented.
Christopher?
I can add on that I think the answer to your question is it's a little bit of both. We need regulation in order to come down in costs, because this risk-based design takes a lot of time from all involved parties, and we spend a lot of money to prove that this technology is safe enough. So if we can get a regulation that is accepted by all the classing societies, this will help a lot. But on the other hand, it promotes maybe us as a company that we can navigate this shallow waters with this risk-based designs. So the answer is you can look from it from both perspectives.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something from two perspectives. So we've got the technological regulations, and then we've got the political regulations. So luckily I can say something of the technical regulations because, again, I'm privileged to be part of the British Standards Institute, and we're actually involved in the European and international standards and regulations. So myself, I'm actually involved in the ISO TC 197 Committee on Hydrogen Fuel Technologies, and I'm representing the UK in the voting on those standards. So it's quite interesting to see how the standards are developed. They clearly do take a lot of time, and of course you need agreement from all the different countries in terms of how things should be done. And from that kind of perspective, we're starting to see a lot of the standards are coming from the compressed hydrogen side of things, and very, very slowly we're starting to see maybe a bit more from the liquid hydrogen side of things. We're actually asking the question about what about ammonia, what about these other types of technologies? And the ISO committees are saying, we haven't got time. What are you talking about? You know, we've got so much work we need to do on hydrogen standards. That's everything from looking at fuel cell systems to electrolyzers to O-rings to materials to everything. We haven't got the capacity to even consider some of these other possibilities. So that's one thing that some people should consider when they're looking at maybe is ammonia going to come through. So that's one reason why we focused, for example, on the liquid hydrogen side of things. Now we're going to move on to the political side of things. So luckily, again, it's one of the interesting things that I've been witnessed is this idea that a lot of the gas that has moved around the world is stored in LNG terminals, liquefied natural gas terminals. And the European Commission have said, in a net zero by 2050 world, what is the relevancy of these terminals? Clearly, these terminals cannot exist at that point if we want to have net zero emissions. So one of the questions that the European Commission has asked the European standards body is, what does it take to convert these LNG terminals into something that would be zero emission? And the most obvious answer would be maybe to consider that they could be liquid hydrogen. Because of course we're already starting to look at pipelines being converted into hydrogen, so it makes logical sense that maybe these terminals would have to be converted. So they've put it to the European Standards Committee to say, okay, what's it take? Can it be done? Do we need new infrastructures? Can we reuse old ones? What's it going to cost? With the idea that once the Standard Committee has put together its findings, then that goes back to the regulation point of view. And then the EU Commission could say, right, we're now, as of, let's say, 2040, banning any LNG terminals. They will now need to be upgraded to the European standards, and that's it. And that's how policy is developed. So the fact that they're already asking this question right now means that they're already forward planning, so that by the time, let's say 10 years comes by, then we're in a position to be able to do something to make sure that we hit those targets.
Great. And maybe if I can just come to you, Nick Brown from BV, Bureau Veritas. And I know you've got a session this afternoon, but Class Society's role in response to that question.
Thanks, Mark. Is that a bit loud? I mean, what was going through my mind, and we had a few conversations during the break, is that, it seems not so very long ago we were talking about trucking small amounts of LNG up to little terminals in Norway for ferries. A couple of years ago, I was standing in the membrane gas tank for one of the new 23,000 TEU ships sailing around the world with gas as fuel. And that's happened quite fast. I think what has been said about where we've got to go next, I think we're going to be surprised probably by what happens, and certainly the industry's expectations they would have a single fuel of the future are seeming increasingly unlikely now. But clearly, we had the chicken and egg slide title again. We've been there before, and there are chickens and eggs to be hatched and counted. Clearly, there's a risk process to be gone through, and I'm sure that from a class perspective, we will have the rules, in time for what's going to be required. It's going to be, perhaps not as cheap and as perfect as everyone wants, or as fast. But I think, the key drivers are going to come from cargo, from the money side, from pricing those externalities that have been mentioned to get us there. I think the regulatory side of it is probably part of the technological development. less than a problem at the moment. But the real challenge is, what fuels we'll have, what price they'll be, how that price will cross the gap from the fossil fuels we use at the moment to the fuels of the future, whatever they are, and there'll probably be many of them. I was particularly inspired by Danielle's presentation, and I wonder what's stopping a rapid expansion in the development of sail-powered cargo shipping. So many people with lots of money want to sail the sea in a big, fast sailing ship. Why not do it with some cargo and a young crew having fun, but also providing us with the food and perhaps the energy we need for a new way of living. And I was particularly interested in an article I read recently talking about building skyscrapers out of wood that, whilst it wasn't a very high skyscraper, that part of the learning from that was not just did you have a sustainably sourced building, but everyone involved in the process of building that new building didn't want to go back to concrete and steel. It was a much nicer working environment, much better to insulate. This was in the north of Sweden, I think, this particular example was based. So I think what we're going to find as well as we go through this is that everything's going to change. And that point about diversity, I think, is really, really important as well. I was at one of our committee meetings last week, and it was all basically white middle-aged men. There was one very senior woman there. That's the reality of our industry today. It is nice to be in a more diverse room today in terms of, both age and gender. But that's going to happen slowly on the technical side. But just as much with finding the fuels of the future, we need to find the talent for the future of shipping, and I think they're inseparable.
Great, thanks, Nick.